Hello and welcome to this course, How to Lead Virtual Teams. My name is Doug Gray, and I'm not sure, today's March 18th, I'm not sure if St. Patrick's Day even happened yesterday anywhere in the world. As you all know, the coronavirus has forced all of us to use virtual tools, and teams are critical as we continue to do our work together. To be clear, there's a bunch of different perspectives on this. One is that we've had virtual teams as long as we've had recorded history. We've always had a fiat from a king or some leader that was distributed to some dislocated or remote team, and then they did or didn't do that. But I think we've got a compelling argument for a lot of more significant changes. In fact, when I use virtual tools like this, I try to open with a little humor. Not the best slide maybe, but I think something's maybe evolving in a difficult and maybe wrong way as we become more dependent on tools. It begs questions about how we use humor in our workforce and how we get on board in a call or a training. Sometimes a good way to do this is to share a bunch of images about yourself, maybe as the facilitator, where you went to school, some of the places you worked. I never share clients or logos from clients because it's confidential. There's no reason to do so, and it just begs all kinds of compliance and legal concerns. So you might consider trying some humor, trying some images, and then adding a little structure. First of these 7 tools, a little structure goes a long way, and I think often we forget about the structures we could have in virtual meetings. So by definition, when we structure a team, it's a conversation about how you organize the tasks, the people, and the processes. So I'm going to talk about these 4 bullet points. I'm going to invite you to consider 2 key questions: how and when you should do whatever, because that leads to a technological application. Secondly, I'm going to share various structures that help you think about ways to structure your team. Third, I'm going to invite you to create a structure. It's called a relationship network. It's a little map. And fourth, I'm going to share several project management software tools so that you can select some that might help you. I made the point a second ago that a little structure goes a long ways. And what do I mean by that? I'm facilitating this conversation, but it's one directional. I'm not getting any feedback. Let's imagine that you were in a meeting like this and you could see the facilitator. I invite you to facilitate with some behavioral norms, with some agenda. I just modeled an agenda. Make a requirement that's consistently applied and adopted by everybody. For instance, everybody needs to be on a web camera, period. The tools are ubiquitous. You could use FaceTime, you could use Zoom. It doesn't matter anymore. But what does matter is if I can see somebody, and if you can see somebody, it accelerates trust. And virtual trust is a thing. It's a thing that can be measured, it can be quantified, it can improve over time. A tremendous example is Amazon. Amazon created all of its profiles and its functionality and its ease of use in part because they know how to measure virtual trust, and they want us to trust them to increase sales. Web cameras work. I don't care what somebody's wearing below the camera line. I do care that they're professionally representing whatever it is that they need to represent. I don't tolerate that excuse. So I implore or encourage you to require that everybody uses web cameras, and it doesn't matter what age they are or whether they've done their hair or put on makeup. The fact is that when we use web cameras, it accelerates virtual trust, period. Next point. Arrive early to the meeting. Be prepared. That way, if you're 2 minutes early, you're set, and should there be any technological problems, you're good to go. My wife's family is all from the military, the Navy. 5 minutes early is late sometimes. So think that way. Think that you have to be 5 minutes early. Next, use nonverbals and design these beforehand. It could be in your agenda. For instance, raise your hand when you'd like to speak. On a Zoom call, I just got off one, there were maybe 15 or 20 people. People didn't know to raise their hands to speak next. They didn't know that on Zoom they could click on the raise hand functionality in the participant list and they could raise their hand. These are nonverbals, whether they're direct or indirect through the participant bit. You can nod your agreement and not interrupt the flow of the meeting. I often touch my nose when I agree with whatever it is somebody else is saying. A lot of my work is now using virtual tools from my home office. Consequently, my behavioral feedback, what I see in the mirror is Doug speaking less. which is a beautiful thing. Because if I'm speaking less, the client's speaking more, and they're working out whatever the problem is they need to work out. So it's a behavioral feedback tool for you when you have your cameras on. Next, use the chat piece to download some content. It could be links or something. It could be something that somebody has a question about, and then you can see it on the side of your screen with most tools. Save the chat and have someone distribute it to everybody after the meeting. It's very easy. There's a 3-dot thing on the bottom right of Zoom. You can do that or delegate that task to anybody on your team. Next, there's not a lot of conversation. There's not protocols that I'm aware of for virtual meetings. There should be. There should be statements, for instance, about confidentiality, legal and insurance compliance requirements, and the fact that this meeting is not being recorded and will not be distributed for any reason. We're using technology loosely, which often means that the virtual tools that we are using require some consistent protocols. And I don't use this word loosely. I think there's a tremendous need for professionals in any world to adopt protocols. We're going to have them, whether they're imposed by your company for HR or ethical or legal or compliance reasons, or whether you draft a short list. I just gave you my short list. So I invite you to use behavioral norms, have an agenda, have everybody use a web camera, all be 5 minutes early. Use your nonverbals, raising your hand, that kind of thing. Use chat and augmented tools to download content and distribute and not interrupt the flow of the decision making. And maintain confidentiality. It's going to be critical that you do so. All right, so that took a few minutes. Let me keep going. 2 key questions. Imagine it, how do I do this? Like this and this. So if you were to look at whether you need to have an informal or a formal meeting, that's the vertical line, or whether you are synchronous or asynchronous, that's the horizontal line. What do I mean? Synchronous is in the same time. It doesn't mean the same time zone. It means that we are meeting in the same time for some purpose. If you look at the 2 examples on the right, Microsoft Teams is ubiquitous. 15.5 is an example of a tremendous software company that meets and has behavioral nudges for specific actions that people are taking to accelerate an outcome. On the right side, Zoom and Skype are ways in which you can provide feedback instantaneously to somebody, just as you and I would if we met in a coffee shop or in a meeting in an office. To be clear, I'm told that Zoom is more HIPAA compliant and has some encryption protocols that make it better in some ways than Skype. I don't know, that's not validated by any of my research, but it's some information that might be useful in your business. The left side, asynchronous, is when you look at something like a webinar or podcast and you pull it up and you look at it when you're working out. It could be that could be mandatory information, it could be optional information, or it could be interruptions. Slack, Yammer are tools that we often use, messaging, to interrupt the other person or to solicit information back. This is an example of informal communication. The top half is more of the formal tools. Informal tools is, frankly, how you and I have always interacted. We've got access to the books behind us or the reference libraries in SharePoint in your organization. But when we want information, what do? We use the informal tools on the bottom. And I suspect that will only increase. To be clear, multitasking is a myth, but we can quickly task from A to B to C to D. And that's what we've always done. So let's assume we'll do it faster, and we'll have different screens to look at as we do so. And the reason? Teams are evolving. The top-down image, where's my hand, on the far left is that hierarchical view that no longer accurately describes your workforce or mine. We have a network analysis model. Think of the people you interact with most often, and that's the image in the middle. This slide came from Josh Bersin, but it's everywhere. Sort of like a virus in that way, and it's expanding. So in the right side, you've got a group of 3 or 4, let's say, project teams that are working synchronously or asynchronously, and they're sharing information. This is your organization and mine. If you were to map this, it could look like some of these goofy images on the left. Amazon, Google, Facebook, and others. You may know the acronym FAGA, Facebook, Apple, Google, and Amazon are disliked by our European and Asian neighbors. I happen to live in North America, in part because of the prevalence, the dominance of these organizational networks. They're everywhere because they describe how you work. So my invitation is to take these two really complex tools, write your name in the middle of the circle, and then determine 6 or 8 people who are critically important to your business and write their names down. When I do this with clients, I did it last week with a room full of 750 people, and many were not able to come up with 6 or 8 people. I don't know that there's a magic number here, but there seems to be. If you can articulate those 6 or 8 people, your homework is to build better relationships with each of them using virtual tools. It doesn't matter what the tools are. I'll give you a handful here, but reach out, call, touch, send images, emojis, notes. The reasons we do these things and interrupt other people's lives is because we want to provide value to them. It's not because we want to distract them. So what is it that that client might need during this critical phase in social interactions? As a species, we need to entertain and teach. So as you think about those 8 people, I invite you to think about the ways that you can entertain them or teach them, whatever you need to teach them. This can be done as a team. Project boards, project management boards, Kanban boards, there's lots of examples of software out there that describe it, are everywhere. And just do a search and talk to your IT people, and they'll select one that might be good for your business. It doesn't matter how big your business is. It doesn't matter how you structure it. But it does matter that you create some structure. I've used action planning worksheets forever, and I assume you have. I assume you've used Gantt sheets, G-A-N-T-T. I assume you've got a project flow chart. Now they're visually stunning. The infographics that exist are as simple as taking data from a spreadsheet and clicking on infographics. So it could be very easy for you to do this. So let me sum up this first tool. The idea is creating structure. Creating structures go a long way. So I'll give you 2 main points. 1, be deliberate. There are critical variables for team designs, and it really is an answer for you and your organization. When do you need this? What's the frequency? Who needs to be part of it? How do you measure it? What's the cadence? Some virtual teams meet daily, some meet hourly, some meet weekly, some meet monthly. Whatever that cadence is a tool really for you to get feedback from others. And that's how we thrive. That's how we respond, not only to markets, but to innovation and transparency. Rewards are key, and I'll talk about them a bit later, but when we design flexibility and then milestones for some ideal level of engagement ahead, that structure enables anybody to provide a reward. So if you get an attaboy for a specific behavior, whether you're male or female or in any geography, that reward means more sometimes than you know. There's a lot of nonsense out there about the value of performance rewards, and I assure you that public recognition is more meaningful than cash. Now let's just think about that one. The point number 2 here is continuous learning. We're always adapting to external stimuli. We're using this course content, we're using video-based tools, we're using that last email or phone message that you got. Why? Because our brains are able to adapt that new data in our prefrontal cortex and respond. We're also able to respond to the fearful stuff, which is why we have emotions, and it's why we respond to whatever new learning that you're looking at. So little structures like a project launch party or process steps or a learning exchange, which is just a fancy name for an open forum. What do you want to talk about today? Shared technology, whatever the tools are, having milestone reviews like process steps. If you can, have direct meetings, especially in a launch, so people get to get a sense of one another and bump one another and carry on a conversation, will lead to some form of meaningful rewards. So that's practice tool number 1, creating structure. In a second, we'll go on to practice tool number 2, which is process and performance. All right, so we just talked about creating structures. I made the point that a little structure